I recently came across a video, a very short video, of a popular atheist who I have refuted in the past. Many of you have seen those refutations, Neil deGrasse Tyson, talking about God.
My name is Armin Navabi. This is the Secular Jihadists. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Let's get started.
Let's take a look at that video and come back and comment.
Do you believe in God?
Me?
Creator?
Yeah, so I'm, the more I look at the universe, just the less convinced I am that there is something benevolent going on. So if your concept of a creator is someone who's all powerful and all good, and I look at disasters that afflict Earth and life on Earth, volcanoes, hurricanes, tornadoes, earthquakes, disease, pestilence, congenital birth defects. You look at this list of ways that life is made miserable on Earth by natural causes. And I just ask, how do you deal with that? So philosophers rose up and said, if there is a God, God is either not all powerful or not all good. I have no problems if, as we probe the origins of things, we bump up into the bearded man. If that shows up, we're good to go, okay? Not a problem. There's just no evidence of it.
So the problem of evil points to the contradiction that exists between the evil that exists in the world and the belief in God. Basically, how could you believe in an all-powerful, all-knowing, and all-loving God while you see so much evil in the world? That's basically it. That's called the problem of evil.
This is a very famous argument, the problem of evil. When he says that philosophers have risen up and spoken, or put the following proposition forward, that if God is all omnipotent, all powerful, and all good, then how could there be evil? Because it would negate one of the two attributes. And obviously, I'm simplifying here. That this is kind of an argument for him, an undercutting argument for God's existence. Now, I'll just put 2 or 3 things to you, maybe just to make you think about the matter. Number one, how do you define evil from a scientific perspective? Being a naturalist, being a physicalist, being a materialist, being an individual who doesn't see anything above and beyond the physical world. Meaning, if something which is not empirically verifiable, something which you cannot put under a microscope with some kind of form, matter, or substance, then it really doesn't exist. It's a figment of one's imagination. Now, I want to know from Neil deGrasse Tyson, this evil that he speaks of, this evil, or these disasters that he speaks of, or these negative things that he speaks of, can you put this thing under the microscope? Can you put evil under the microscope? When he says that God is, how can evil exist in the world? He is citing Epicurus, a Hellenistic philosopher. And when he says the philosophers, he means this particular philosopher, because this is the person who brings forward this argument. Can you put evil under the microscope? So therefore, does evil exist on your physicalist, materialist paradigm? This is the first question. And if it doesn't exist, of course, then what is this question worth? It's worth nothing at all. There's no currency in the questioning.
It's actually quite easy to define evil without God. Without God or religion, evil is just the actions or events that cause harm and suffering. Atheists can recognize the existence of harm and suffering in the world. The question of whether evil can be put under a microscope is irrelevant. Evil is not a physical substance that you could observe in a laboratory. However, this doesn't mean that harm and suffering don't have a real impact on the world and sentient beings. And this harm and suffering can be observed and measured. And because it can be measured, it can be studied. This harm can be studied and analyzed through scientific methods, such as medical research, psychology, social sciences. And because the harm can be analyzed and studied through scientific methods, that brings evil within the realm of science. For example, the effects of war, famine, poverty on human health and well-being can be objectively measured and studied through scientific research. So the concept of evil, as defined as actions and events that cause harm, is compatible with the scientific perspective.
But let's assume for the sake of argument that evil does exist, and somehow maybe you can put it under your microscope. Okay. Why do you assume that theists, like Muslims for example, or others, or even Christians, to be fair, or Jews, believe in a God with only two attributes, omnipotence and goodness. Why do you assume that that's what we believe? We believe in a God with many attributes, and of course one of them is wisdom. We as Muslims believe that Allah is Al-Hakim, which means the most wise. And what is wisdom? Wisdom, from the Islamic perspective, is وضع الشيء في مكانه الصحيح, or appropriacy, the idea of putting something in its rightful place. Meaning, as the Quran states, something which is negative or which you don't like could be good for you. وَعَسَىٰ أَن تَكْرَهُوا شَيْئًا وَهُوَ خَيْرٌ لَكُمْ وَاللَّهُ أَعْلَمُ وَأَنْتُمْ لَا تَعْلَمُونَ. That you could hate something, but it's good for you. So all these disasters that you've cited, which of course are not limited to, for example, the earthquake that we saw in Turkey, and of course in Syria, which we make dua for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for the relief of those people. How do you know that it's not either a test or an elevation of those individuals who have been murdered or who have been killed in the earthquake? Or we believe as Muslims they've been martyred. Sahibul Hadam, as one of the things in the hadith that's mentioned, the person who's been of a collapsed building on them is one of the martyrs. It's actually a hadith in our tradition. So it could be that there is a wisdom behind some of the things which we as individuals find negative. And of course, if we assume a God with only two attributes, we are eliminating this possibility. So I think we're done here with Epicurus's conundrum or dilemma, which quite frankly, even atheist philosophers, of course you're not one of them because you're an astrophysicist who's delving into things or fields which are not his own, have even admitted, like William Rowe, that this is an intellectually bankrupt case anyway, that this problem of evil objection or interrogation to the theist is something which is not really effectual, is intellectually bankrupt.
These two attributes, God being all-loving and all-powerful, contradict the existence of evil in the world. God having other attributes do not negate that. He then uses a common response religious people often use for the problem of evil, which is that God has a greater good planned that will come out of this evil. We can't always tell what this greater good is because we don't have God's wisdom. This is a worthless, unfalsifiable claim because it's impossible to disprove the existence of a hypothetical reason that is beyond our comprehension. This kind of unfalsifiable claim is essentially immune to criticism, which makes it difficult to take seriously. The example of the earthquake in Turkey shows how bad this line of reasoning is.
For example, the earthquake that we saw in Turkey and of course in Syria. How do you know that it's not either a test or an elevation of those individuals who have been murdered or who have been killed in the earthquake? Or we believe as Muslims they've been martyred. Sahibul Hadam.
If God is all-powerful and all-knowing, then he should be able to find other ways to achieve the intended purpose without torturing and killing so many innocent children in an earthquake. If there is no other way to achieve whatever purpose God had other than torturing and killing children, I specifically say children so you don't have the excuse of maybe they have sinned or they're supposed to learn something from this. If that is the only way and there is no other way, then God is limited. Then you're admitting that God has no other way. There is no other way to achieve whatever purpose there is other than going through this much suffering and misery. So if God is limited, how could God be all-powerful? Imagine thinking that there is wisdom behind leaving children under all that rubble and letting them die after hours of agony. To test who? The society? Their parents? Why would the children have to pay such a heavy price for such a test? Could God not find a better way to conduct this test?
For example, the earthquake that we saw in Turkey and of course in Syria. How do you know that it's not either a test or an elevation of those individuals who have been murdered or who have been killed in the earthquake? Or we believe as Muslims they've been martyred. Sahibul Hadam. Then he nonchalantly, or I could say audaciously, mentions at the end of his video that if you have evidence, then bring it forward.
But if you got some good evidence, bring it, bring it.
It's as if he doesn't know that there have been evidences put forward by the likes of even Aristotle, all the way up to present-day enlightened figures and beyond, from all traditions for the existence of God, ontological arguments, teleological arguments, fine-tuning arguments, cosmological arguments. You have not engaged with those arguments. Anybody, even an RE student in GCSE level, knows Aquinas' 5 ways, Thomas Aquinas' 5 ways to proving God's existence. Most people now understand what a fine-tuning argument is and what kind of permutations it's taken. Whether William Paley's fine-tuning argument of the watchmaker's argument, you've got a watch and the, and what is it? Is there contrivance, he calls it? Is there some creation, or is there none? Or the argument that you've got all these you've got these constants, you've got the electromagnetic constant, something more in your wavelength, and you've got the gravitational constant, and that they are in a life-permitting range, and had that these constants not been a particular way in Richard Dawkins' own words, the Goldilocks zone, then there would not be any life at all. It's as if you don't know these arguments. So don't say present the evidence, because of course, what do you mean by evidence? And this is the thing. You have the audacity to reject types of evidence. If we present a cosmological type of argument, then maybe it's not satisfactory. If you present an ontological type of argument, it's not satisfactory. So what kind of evidence will you be willing to accept?
The arguments Mohammed Hijab mentions are not evidence, they're arguments. Evidence is based on empirical observation, experimentation, and data collection. Arguments are based on logical reasoning, not empirical evidence. Evidence must be objective, verifiable, repeatable, testable, and falsifiable. It's amazing for somebody who has been involved in so many debates, has written philosophical books, and claims to be an expert in philosophy, he lacks a basic understanding of what evidence is. As far as arguments go, it's funny how Mohammed Hijab seems to suggest that just because these arguments exist, they must be valid. There are so many counter arguments and refutations to each one of these arguments. In my bestseller book, Why There Is No God, I debunked 20 of the most common arguments for the existence of God. But you can get this book for free using the link in the description below. Mohammed Hijab tries to make the arguments for the existence of God seem more convincing than they actually are. Which is strange, because according to survey, more than 70% of philosophers don't believe in God.
Suffice it for me to say one thing in terms of this whole question of evidence. One thing only, that the universe is a certain way. It has certain physical properties. That we can all agree on, right? Okay, if the universe is a certain way and it has certain physical properties, the physical properties of the universe, okay, allow life to exist. We all agree, no problem. Now, tell me, what is a better explanation? That you have an intelligence or a knowledge that has brought forth this reality, or that you have no knowledge, that there is no mover, there is no intelligence or mind. For you, which is it? If you say the latter, then that it itself requires an explanation, which of course the atheist is deplete of any kind of explanation. Atheism itself has doesn't have any explanatory scope or power. So with that, I'll let you think. From whence did the uniformity, the regularity, and the stability of the universe that is allowing human beings or any other life form to exist come from? Did it come from a life-permitting force or an intelligence or some knowledge, or did it come from no such thing?
The idea that a lack of belief in God requires an explanation is a common misconception. Atheism is simply a lack of belief in God, not a positive assertion about the nature of the universe. It's not necessary to provide an alternative explanation for the existence of the universe in order to reject the idea of a deity. Mohammed Hijab thinks that if we cannot explain the existence of the universe in naturalistic terms, then the only explanation is that an intelligent design must have created it. This argument is known as the argument from ignorance, because it assumes that the lack of evidence for one explanation automatically proves the opposite explanation. He doesn't seem to understand that the burden of proof is not on the atheist to disprove God. The burden of proof is on those who claim that God exists. That being said, suggesting an intelligent source as the best explanation for the properties of the universe would actually make the situation a lot more complicated. The principle of Occam's razor says that the most simple explanation is the best explanation. Attributing the properties of the universe to an intelligent source leaves us with a more complicated explanation. It's answering a mystery with a bigger mystery. Imagine if you lost your keys in your house and you cannot find them. If I suggest that a magical fairy took them, this wouldn't be a good explanation, because it's answering one mystery with a bigger mystery, but it's not explaining anything. It's making the problem bigger.
Be honest with yourself and answer this question. And I believe if you're being honest with yourself, you will look at yourself in the mirror and realize that it is the former rather than the latter. If you don't want to live with that realization, then know that you are lying to yourself, deluding yourself. The atheist delusion, it will be for you. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
I've been your host, Armin Navabi. This has been the Secular Jihadists. Don't forget to like and subscribe. See you in the next video.